When I started a YouTube channel, I did not have international trade policy as one of the topics I was going to cover on my bingo card, but here we are. Once again, sometimes you choose the topic and sometimes it chooses itself. So what is going on with tariffs and how does it affect musicians and what do we do about it? Let's get into it. As a drummer, I have always loved gear. I've loved drums, cymbals, sticks, heads, and I kind of obsess about it to make sure that I'm getting the best sounds possible so that I, as an artist, can express myself the best that I can. I suspect that if you're watching this video, maybe you feel that way a little bit too. While I was getting my bachelor's degree, for several years I worked in a music store. It was a blast. I absolutely loved it. I never really felt like I was selling products. I always felt like I was selling dreams. My favorite customers were kids, usually teenagers, who had absolutely worked their tail off to save up and buy something. Whether it was a new guitar, drum kit, hi-hat cymbals, they came in with absolute fire in their eyes because they'd just spent the last year mowing lawns or babysitting or shoveling driveways or weeding gardens, whatever it was. And today they were going to take that dream home. Man, I loved those days and I loved working in that store because I kind of got to share in that excitement and that fulfillment with every one of those sales. And I'm not gonna lie, I still get excited when I get a new piece of gear. And if you're anything like me, I bet you've got your wish list pretty close in your brain. It wouldn't take much to tell me the next item or 2 or 3 or 5 that you wanna buy. So let's say that it's a new ride cymbal you've got your eye on and you're shooting for about $500. Right now, as of the making of this video, about $500 is the going price in US dollars for a 20-inch Zildjian K-series ride cymbal. But when you show up to the drum shop to make the actual purchase, all of a sudden the price is almost $800. This could actually be the reality in the United States soon. And even if it's not a big ticket item, think about the things you buy all the time or relatively frequently. Maybe it's heads or sticks. The prices on those items is gonna go up too. Before we get into some of the details, I want you to know that this video is not political and it's not legal or financial advice either. It's just my take as a drummer, someone who's worked in the music industry and someone who's been in music and music education for a long time. And if you go to the description of the video, I'll link some of the sources that I used to learn about what's going on in the music industry and get ready to make this video. It's some pretty interesting reading. My best advice is to be aware of what's going on and be paying attention to prices and trends, especially in your area. And if you're watching this video from outside the United States, I'm sure the situation is different, so you'll have to do some research on that as well. So what is a tariff? Simply put, a tariff is just a fancy word for a tax that the government puts on importers when they buy a product from outside the United States to be used or sold inside the United States. And yes, all sorts of countries do tariffs, not just the United States, but since I'm in the United States and US tariffs have made massive headlines this year, that's what we're talking about for today. If you live in a state that has sales tax, you're already familiar with this concept. Let's say you buy something that costs $100, but the sales tax is 10%. Then the price you're actually going to pay is $110. $100, that's the price of the item, that gets paid to the store. And then $10, that's tax that gets paid to the government. So tariffs make absolutely anything that's coming from the United States more expensive. Regardless of who actually pays that tariff, the cost of the item is more than it was before. The tariff rate is going to vary by item type or where it's coming from, but right now the baseline US tariff rate is 10% on pretty much everything, and then ranging up to 125% on certain items coming from China. So the next question obviously is, okay, who pays the tariffs? This can get a little bit complicated, so I want to talk about 3 or 4 scenarios that are pretty commonly happening right now. I'm filming this video on June 21st, 2025, and things are very much still up in the air, and I'm sure they'll change, but as of today, this is kind of how things sit. So probably the most common situation is that companies are just passing the cost of the tariff on to the consumer. This is a really common business practice when any price goes up for any reason. So let's say the cost of shipping goes up, then the end price goes up, or the cost of the raw material goes up, the end price goes up. This is just kind of how it works. This is especially true with smaller businesses. They just don't have a ton of profit margin usually, and so if the cost to them is greater, then they have to charge more to the consumer. One of the local companies that I use here in my area to do merch, things like t-shirts and hats and hoodies and whatnot, just told me that over 90% of the items he buys to run his business just doubled in price. So who pays more? In this case, I do. In other cases, some companies are going to split the cost of that tariff with their consumer. So this means that they're going to absorb or eat a little bit of that tariff and then pass the remainder on to the consumer. That way, the actual consumer or customer, you or me, only ends up paying part of the tariff. For a lot of businesses, this is really hard to do, again, because their profit margin might already be pretty slim. And especially in the music products industry, it is fiercely competitive. And so there just may not be a lot of room for this option. In a very few cases, there are foreign manufacturers and producers that are just simply lowering their prices. They've decided that they are going to eat the cost of that tariff because, let's face it, the United States is the largest consumer base in the world. And so it makes a lot of sense to sell to Americans. And so some producers are just doing whatever they have to keep the product flowing into the United States. But again, these companies are operating within a profit margin and within a financial business model, so there's going to be a limit to how far they can take this approach. And also, in a few cases, there are going to be situations where each of those segments is going to take on part of the cost of that tariff. So the foreign producer might lower their cost a little bit, the US importer might take on a little bit of it, and then pass a little bit of it on to the consumer, so it gets split up 3 ways. So what's going to be the effect or the long-term results of a prolonged tariff situation? First off, tariffs are not new. They've been used by governments for a long time. The United States is currently imposing tariffs in a way that really hasn't been seen in the modern global marketplace. And so we're getting a lot more attention on these tariffs. In the short term, it's kind of anybody's guess. Right now, a lot of retailers are trying to wait and see because changes can and do happen quickly and some negotiations are still ongoing. So we're just trying to feel out what the market's actually going to do in the short term. In the long run, prices are absolutely going to go up. You can take that to the bank, as it were. Absorbing the tariffs in the short term might work for some companies, but in the long run, they still have to make a profit to survive. So there's going to be a limit to how far they can go with this approach. At the end of the day, all of these companies have to make a profit to survive. So eventually the price is going to go up. And this is generally just how economies work. I mean, there's a lot of factors beyond tariffs that can make the price of something go up. And over time, the price of everything is going to rise. And with very few exceptions, once prices go up, they generally don't come back down. So as a result, there's some brands and products that are available in the marketplace right now that are going to get more and more expensive, and they're going to get harder and harder to get. So eventually, some of them are going to go away. Or they might just get so expensive that they're no longer viable in the American marketplace. In the music education sphere, so think school bands and orchestras, there are already some strong warning signs that some brands are going to pull out of the United States market and others are going to get significantly more expensive. And who's going to pay that cost? Students and families are. And what this might mean is that fewer kids are going to participate in those activities, and in the long run, that could have a massive impact on the music business at large. It's also likely that smaller retails are going to have a harder time keeping their doors open than larger ones. It's almost a guarantee that your local drum shop just does not have the buying power or the margin that somebody like Guitar Center or Amazon is going to have. So at least in the short run, those larger mega companies are going to have an easier time absorbing those extra costs than smaller shops will. Okay, so what about American companies? Let's think about products that are made in America by American-owned businesses. They don't have to pay tariffs, right? Well, sort of. In 2025, almost every business in the United States is going to rely on imports in some way to run their business. I mean, it might be a simple thing like the ink they print on their package is imported. Or maybe it's their machinery or parts for their machinery. Or maybe it's a raw material. Let's take Zildjian Cymbals, for example. Zildjian is an American company making an American product in the United States, right? No problems, right? Well, think about what they need to actually make those cymbals. They need raw materials, and one of the raw materials they need is tin. The United States currently has 0 active tin mines and hasn't produced any commercially available tin since 1993. So are Zildjian's prices going to go up? Obviously, I can't speak for them, but I'd bet on it. Okay, so tariffs are a thing, and they're likely to be around for a long time. So what do we do about it? There are a handful of things you might consider. First, if you've got a purchase you know you're going to make it as soon as possible. For me, this is going to include drum gear as well as recording studio gear. And if I can, I'm going to get today's pre-tariff prices. Secondly, if you can, buy from your local music store or drum shop. This might mean spending a couple more bucks, but it's gonna help that shop to be a lot more likely to keep their doors open in the long term. If you remember during COVID, there were a lot of clubs and venues that simply shut their doors because they didn't have an audience, they didn't have a crowd. And then when COVID eased off, they didn't come back. They did not financially survive that crisis. So if prices do rise even somewhat significantly, a lot of small retailers are going to have a tough time staying open and surviving. So please support them as much as you possibly can. Third, I've heard a lot of talk about how the used market will save us when prices on new gear starts to rise. I'd be careful about that. If you remember just a few years ago, the price of new cars went up significantly for a variety of reasons. But when the price of new cars went up, the demand on used cars went absolutely bonkers, and used car prices shot up almost more than new prices did. And I know that used cars is not a direct correlation to used music gear, but it's a useful example. One main difference is that used music gear actually holds its value really remarkably well. And in the case of certain instruments like vintage instruments, the used piece can actually be more expensive than the new one. So if you're going to shop used, which I still do highly recommend, it's important that you do your research and you know what the values are so that you are still getting a good deal and not getting taken advantage of just by a rising market. Likewise for sellers, know what your values are on the used market and know what your walkaway point is. In some cases, it might be worthwhile just to keep the gear unless you absolutely have to have the money. And then in that case, make a fair deal. One major upside to buying and selling used is that money goes directly to an individual, and in most cases it's another musician, rather than going into a company. In any case, as new prices rise, look for the used market to rise as well. My next piece of advice is just simply to be patient. I'm not great at predicting the future, but if the economy continues to be uncertain, then a lot of music companies are going to get a little bit nervous about holding on to a lot of stock. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a lot of discounts, deals, and sales as things get a little bit dicey with tariffs. So if you know what you want and what it's worth, and you've got cash in hand ready to make the purchase, you're gonna know when that price point hits a place where it's worth pulling the trigger on that purchase. My last piece of advice is just to take care of your gear. And I know that's kind of generic advice for anything, whether it's financial instability or whatever, but the longer you can make your gear last, the less you're gonna have to shell out money, especially as prices rise. If you can make the ride cymbal or the snare drum or even the heads and the sticks last longer, it's gonna save you money as you go. All right, at the end of the day, being a musician means being adaptable and rolling with the punches. And sometimes those punches come from tariffs and rising prices. It's not fun, but it is real. The upside is, I think we all know that musicians are scrappy and we're creative and we're gonna keep making music no matter what. So if you've watched this far, I'm really curious, what are you saving up for and what have you noticed in terms of prices so far? And what do you think is gonna happen next? Let me know what you think. And if you found this video helpful or interesting, please go ahead and hit like, and I always appreciate it if you subscribe if you aren't already. And please do check out some of my other videos. As I'm sure a lot of us will, I will be keeping an eye on the tariffs and the pricing situation, and if anything crazy happens, I'll post an update to this video. Until then, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. This video brought to you by Dr. Pepper Zero with a hint of lime and coconut. Absorbing, there's a word for you.